hands together for Claire Munch.
All right, I would like to start by asking all of you to take a quick look at what you're wearing. Take a look at your shirt, your pants, skirt, dress, whatever you're wearing, maybe even your accessories, your shoes. The first thing I'd like you to do is just compliment yourself. Tell yourself you look amazing. You picked out a great outfit today, I'm sure. But then second, I want you to ask yourself, why am I wearing this? Now, if mentally you just answered, so I don't get arrested for public indecency, you're correct, but that's not where I'm going with this. The answer I'm looking for lies in the fascinating world of fashion history. So fashion history is technically something that impacts us on a daily basis, but it's not something we ever really think about at all. So today, I'm going to talk about two main elements of fashion history. I'm going to talk about how fashion trends start and why they tend to repeat time and time again throughout the course of history. So starting with the first element, which is how fashion trends begin, I'm again going to break that down into two separate elements, which are historical events and social norms. Starting with the first one, let's think about how historical events or what historical events might impact fashion. So wars, activist movements, and especially popular entertainment and different forms of media can have a huge effect on what it is we wear and why. Secondly, social norms. Times change. What is and is not acceptable to wear changes over time, and thus we change with it. So, putting these two factors together, let's look at an example. Now, according to the Fashion Tech Institute, at the dawn of the 20s, the world was reeling from World War I. The conflict had a fundamental and irreversible impact on society and culture, and subsequently, fashion. So if you think about how fashion looked, especially for women, before World War I, you thought about maybe Victorian era, you had those large dresses, large skirts, tiny waists, very flamboyant. But then consider after that, things got a lot more simple. Dresses got shorter. Women had a lot more to do at that point. So along with that simplicity became more movement and more independence. But why aren't we still wearing what we wore in the 20s? Let's consider events that happened next, in the 30s. Maybe some of you are starting to think of the Great Depression. If you are, that would be a huge event that impacted women's fashion. Styles became a lot more simple even further, but they weren't as flashy. Women usually made their clothes at home from cheap fabrics and in conservative styles. Now, since we've talked about how trends start, let's discuss why they tend to repeat. Now, I'm sure all of us have at some point have heard either a parent or grandparent say, oh yeah, something I wore when I was a kid is coming back into style. We hear this all the time, for better or for worse, up to interpretation, of course. But, for example, I'd like to look at an easy to recognize thing, which is the waistline of clothes, of outfits, dresses, pants, skirts, etc., the waistline. So, up here in the top corner you can see an outfit from the 1920s. In the center, the 60s, and I'm sure we all recognize the early 2000s, again, for better or for worse. So, one thing that all of these eras have in common is what's called a drop waist. So, the waistline on all of these dresses and outfits isn't up here at the thinnest point of your waist. Instead, it's down by the hips. So you see the drop waist in the 20s dresses, the 60s skirts, and the 2000s jeans. Now you might be thinking, what on earth do these three eras have in common? They look pretty different. But each of these eras had a pretty distinct and impactful feminist movement. For example, the 20s saw the flappers. They were a huge change in lifestyle for women of the times. The 60s, you saw mod fashion and the sexual revolution of the 60s. And then the 2000s, we all know the modern feminist movement, women again standing up for themselves. So what all these have in common is that women are imitating a more free style, and thus a more boxy silhouette, often reminiscent of masculine attire. So, in contrast, let's look at high waists. So you might be thinking of stuff we wear today, in the 80s, 90s, but especially the 50s. So, an article by People's History stated, at the end of World War II, men went back to work, and the women, they went home. Primary forces behind consumerism included housewives and the baby boom. And this caused the classic Americana vintage look that we know and love. This era was about going back to the common lifestyle that everyone knew before the war. So a more motherly figure, which was accentuating the waist, came back into style. Now, fashion history is fascinating, but how often do we really think about it? Not often. Today was probably the first time you looked down at your outfit and thought, what happened that caused me to wear this today? So, next time you buy a new piece of clothing, ask yourself, what events led up to its creation? And is it familiar? Does it look like something you may have seen in a history book or an old movie? Or maybe not. Wear something new and start a trend for someone else to do a speech on in another 100 years or so.